I'm Katie Sieverding, Government Relations Coordinator for the South Dakota Retailers Association. The South Dakota Retailers Association is a 3,900 member statewide business organization. Our primary mission is to represent retailers in the legislative and regulatory process. In addition, we provide information, training, and member services for retailers, restaurants, grocery stores, and other businesses. Today's webinar will feature a presentation by Kimberly Hoberg. Kim is a business specialist with the South Dakota Division of Rehabilitation Services. She has a Master's of Science degree in Rehabilitation Counseling and is also a certified rehabilitation counselor. Kimberly is a primary contact for the South Dakota employers and businesses, providing technical support in the areas of hiring people with disabilities, reasonable accommodations, business tax incentives, Section 503 regulations, and other areas of disability-related topics. I have a couple notes before we start the presentation. All the phones of the attendees are muted, so we won't be hearing background noises. There is a PowerPoint presentation for this webinar, and it's available in the handouts box on the side of your screen. We have provided both a 3 slides per page note-taking version and a full page version. You may need to click on the arrow to maximize the box so you can see the handouts. We will also have a question and answer period at the conclusion of the presentation. You can ask a question at any time by going to the webinar panel on the side of your screen. You should see a questions box. Just type in your question and click send. If you don't see that questions panel, you may need to click on the arrow to maximize it. You are also welcome to email questions to us. At the conclusion, I'll read the questions out loud and Kim will provide the answers. I'll now turn it over to Kim for the presentation.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to provide training on incorporating disability etiquette within the workplace or providing customer service within your business. During today's webinar, you'll be learning about the following: disability etiquette and what it means, people first language, strategies of how to incorporate disability etiquette in your workplace, and how to effectively interact with employees or customers who have various types of disabilities. So moving on to the next slide. Here's just a few facts. Nearly 1 in 5 people in the United States live with a disability, which is equivalent to about 19% of the total population in the United States. Almost 1 in 3 unemployed adults who are able to work have reported a disability. During 2015, the prevalence of people with disabilities living in South Dakota was 105,300 individuals, or 12.5% of the state population. So now, I just want to give an overview of what a disability is, and that's according to the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA's definition. The ADA defines a person with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. This includes people who have a record of such an impairment, even if they do not currently have a disability. It also includes individuals who do not have a disability, but are regarded as having a disability. The ADA also makes it unlawful to discriminate against a person based on that person's association with a person with a disability. For example, a parent with a child that has a disability would be an example of this. It is important to remember that in the context of the ADA, disability is a legal term rather than a medical definition. Because it has a legal definition, the ADA's definition of a disability is different from how a disability may be defined under some other laws. Now, keep in mind, individuals are either born with a disability or may acquire them later on in life. Also, keep in mind that not all disabilities are visible to the eye, as they can be hidden as well. So moving on to the next slide. You may be wondering what disability etiquette is. Disability etiquette refers to the preferred method or etiquette when meeting with, introducing, writing about, providing assistance, enjoying the company of people with disabilities. The principles of disability etiquette are fairly simple. First and foremost, rely on common sense to guide your interactions with people with disabilities and behave in the same courteous and respectful way that you would with anyone else. A basic understanding of disability etiquette can help make employees feel more comfortable when interacting with coworkers and supervisors with disabilities and can help prevent awkward situations. Good disability etiquette can also expand business opportunities and help organizations serve customers more effectively. I just have a little comic, or a little humorous comic that's about disability etiquette. In the comic, it says, "I'm not disabled or differently disabled or specially abled or exceptionally abled. Rather, I'm an accountant in a wheelchair." There are several steps that can be taken to facilitate appropriate disability etiquette, such as utilizing people's first language, which recognizes that individuals are more than their disabilities. Don't ask questions about a person's disability unless it's brought up by the individual. When offering assistance, wait until the offer is accepted. Listen for or ask how to provide support to that individual. Speak directly to the person, not to their companion or sign language interpreter. Don't be afraid to ask questions when you're unsure of what to do. When being introduced to a person with a disability, it is appropriate to offer to shake hands. Now, people with limited hand use or who have artificial limbs can usually shake hands. Shaking hands with the left hand is also an acceptable greeting. And most importantly, treat adults as adults. Address people who have disabilities by their first name only when extending the same familiarity to others. Now, on this slide and the next slide is going to give some examples of people first language, which it emphasizes the individuality, equality, and dignity of people with disabilities. Rather than defining people primarily by their disability, people first language conveys respect by emphasizing the fact that people with disabilities are first and foremost just that, people. Businesses or employers should use people first language when communicating about disabilities, whether verbally or in writing. It is important to note that many people with disabilities, particularly younger people, are choosing to use identity first language, such as autistic or disabled. How a person chooses to self-identify is up to them, and they should not be corrected or admonished if they choose not to use identity first language. So here are some examples of what isn't appropriate to say and what is appropriate. The first one, don't say handicapped or disabled. Instead, refer to people with disabilities or a person with a disability. It's inappropriate to say the deaf or suffers a hearing loss. Instead, you say a person who is deaf or who is hard of hearing. Now, when referring to an individual, you don't want to refer to them as the blind. Instead, you want to refer to them, him or her, as a person who is blind or is visually impaired. Now, for individuals that utilize a wheelchair, It's inappropriate to say wheelchair bound, confined to a wheelchair. Instead, say person who utilizes or uses a wheelchair. Now for handicap parking, hotel room, it's better to say accessible parking or accessible hotel room. Instead of saying person who is crippled, say person with a physical disability. Now moving on to the next slide, here are some more examples of what don't to say and say. Don't refer to someone that he or she is mentally retarded. Instead, refer them as he or she has an intellectual or cognitive disability. The next one, it's inappropriate to say he or she is emotionally disturbed. Instead, refer as he or she has a mental health condition or a diagnosis. And the second to last one, it's inappropriate to say he or she is special needs or has problems with. Instead, he or she needs assistance, so forth. And the next one, instead of saying stricken with muscular dystrophy, instead refer to that person who has muscular dystrophy. Instead of saying someone is an addict, more appropriate to say a person who is in recovery from a substance abuse disorder. As the baby boomer population ages and remains employed in the workplace, the pervasiveness of disability management within the workplace continues to be a substantial concern for businesses. Disability management or inclusion simply refers to including etiquette strategies associated with fostering the inclusion of people with disabilities within workplace settings. By incorporating effective disability etiquette strategies within the workplace will result in all employees becoming more comfortable or productive. This can be done through 4 different strategies. It can be done through recruitment, interview, new employee training, or just general workplace etiquette strategies. Now moving on to the next slide, I'm going to break down these strategies in kind of more details. The first one, recruitment etiquette. People with disabilities represent an untapped labor pool offering valuable skills, qualifications, and assets for employers or businesses. Several recruitment strategies can increase businesses' access to potential applicants, such as, here are some strategies, post job openings within local disability organizations and college university career centers. Include details about the job location in all postings and highlight accessible features of the location, if appropriate. Also consider only including qualifications and job postings that are actually required for the available position. Require equal qualifications of all job applicants, regardless of a disability. And advertise your business as an equal opportunity employer. Moving on to interview etiquette. Interview etiquette consists of when it comes to scheduling interviews, greeting interviewees, and during interviews. This slide contains some examples of strategies to consider when conducting or incorporating interview etiquette within your workplaces. Inform applicants that accommodations can be provided upon request, and list the contact information of who they can contact for further information. Schedule interviews at an accessible location within your business, or consider an alternative location if there isn't one available. Be mindful that all applicants may need to arrange transportation to and from the interview. therefore provide them with an estimated interview duration. When greeting or welcoming interviewees, use your normal tone of voice. Just be yourself. Some other additional strategies to consider on interview etiquette: introduce yourself and other interviewers and offer to shake hands with the interviewee. Speak directly to applicants, not their companions, personal attendants, or sign language interpreters, as I previously mentioned. Ask similar questions to all interviewees by emphasizing on what their skills, abilities, and achievements are. Consider having the interview location with adequate lighting, and this is really important when interviewing individuals that are deaf or hard of hearing. Now moving on to new employee etiquette training. Consider and be prepared to assess the physical features of the workplace environment and make reasonable adjustments with the involvement of the new employees if necessary. Also, prepare coworkers and supervisors for the arrival of a new employee with a disability when appropriate. This may include training and orientation on disability-specific topics. Also include employees with disabilities in your business's emergency evacuation planning and procedures. Now moving on to the next slide. Disability etiquette for customers with disabilities. So overall, the ADA is categorized into 5 titles or sections relating to different areas of public life. However, for today's purposes, I would like to focus on Title 3 of the ADA, which pertains to non-discrimination on the basis of a disability by public accommodations and in commercial facilities. In other words, public accommodations refers to privately owned, leased, or operated facilities such as hotels, restaurants, retail merchants, doctor's offices, golf courses, private schools, daycare centers, fitness places, sports stadiums, movie theaters, etc. Again, as I just mentioned, Title III of the ADA pertains to public accommodations and sets the minimum standards for accessibility for alterations and new construction of facilities. It also requires public accommodations or businesses to make reasonable modifications to their normal ways when serving customers with disabilities. It also requires businesses to take steps to effectively communicate with customers who have vision, hearing, or speech disabilities. Throughout the remainder of the presentation, please keep in mind that people with disabilities continue to be the most unemployed and underemployed population in the United States. They represent an untapped labor pool offering valuable skills, qualifications, and assets for employers. During 2015, there was a 32.6% gap in the employment rate of people with disabilities versus those without disabilities in South Dakota. Furthermore, this diverse group represents a growing market for businesses and a valuable source of talent and support for public programs and activities. The spending power of people with disabilities is currently about $220 billion. Wounded veterans, an aging baby boomer generation, and other factors continue to swell the population of those with disabilities. Individuals with disabilities, as well as their family members, friends, and associates, are people you want to include in your business or organizations as customers, employees, participants, volunteers, and supporters. Now, the following slides will provide you with various etiquette tips to effectively interact with employees or customers with disabilities that may come into your workplaces or businesses. First, I would like to begin with people who utilize wheelchairs or other mobility devices. It's imperative to remember that individuals who use wheelchairs or other mobility devices have different disabilities along with various abilities. Don't make assumptions about his or her limitations based on appearances of the assistive devices that they are utilizing. Don't push, touch, or lean on an individual's wheelchair. It's part of their his or her personal space. Additionally, if you assist someone down a curb without waiting for his or her permission or instructions, you may be at risk of dumping him or her out of the chair. You may also detach the wheelchair's parts if you lift it by the handles or by the footrest. People who utilize canes or crutches need to balance themselves, so it's important to never grab him or her unexpectedly. People who have mobility limitations may lean on a door for support as they open it. Therefore, pushing the door open from behind or unexpectedly opening the door may cause him or her to fall. When communicating with individuals who utilize a wheelchair, position yourself to sit with them at his or her eye level. If sitting with them is not an option, stand at a slight distance so he or she is not straining their neck to see or make eye contact with you. Be sure to keep accessible ramps or doors to your buildings unlocked and unblocked at all times, especially within business hours. Under the ADA, displays in your stores should not be in front of entrances. Waste baskets should not be placed in the middle of aisles, and boxes or containers should not be sitting on accessible ramps. If your business has different routes into or within the building, be prepared to have signs directing him or her to accessible routes within your building. Individuals with mobility limitations may also encounter problems with falling. Therefore, it's important to have warning signs after washing or the floors are wet. When it rains or snows out, you can also put out floor mats to keep the floors dry as much as possible. Moving on to the other slide on how to provide or interact or etiquette tips for individuals who utilize wheelchairs or other mobility devices. Upon hiring a person with mobility limitations, be prepared to evaluate accessible and inaccessible components of the work site. You can do this with the involvement of individuals by offering a tour of your work site and being open to suggestions or ideas they may have. Also be prepared to make accessible changes to the workplace according to specific work-related needs of employees. For example, making workspace modifications, positioning items that are within reach, etc. If your business or organization has counters that are too high for individuals using wheelchairs to see over, walk around and provide customer service to him or her. Also, consider having a clipboard handy if filling in forms or providing signatures is expected. A business may also want to ensure employees are prepared to angle down or detach a keypad so a person using a wheelchair can sign his or her electronic signature upon making a credit card purchase. Now moving on to interacting or etiquette tips for individuals who are blind or visually impaired. Individuals who are blind or are visually impaired know how to orientate themselves and get around on the street. He or she are also able to travel unassisted, so they may utilize a cane or a guide dog. Please keep in mind that not all individuals with visual limitations are obvious. Therefore, be prepared to offer assistance when asked. As you're scheduling interviews or meetings, be familiar with the route of travel and explain descriptive directions that won't require the reliance on visual references. Verbally greet and identify yourself before extending your hand to greet a person who is blind or visually impaired. In group settings, be sure to introduce the others. When new customers or employees offer him or her a guided tour of your facility. As you're beginning a guided tour, offer your arm or elbow to assist with guiding individuals. Or if he or she has a guide dog, walk alongside him or her on the opposite side of the guide dog and describe the setting. For example, describe any obstacles such as stairs, steps, opening or revolving doors, slopes, or other hazards. If you're giving directions, give specific non-visual information rather than saying, go to your right when you reach the office supplies, which assumes the person knows where the office supplies are. Simply say, walk forward to the end of this aisle and make a full right. Also, offer to read written information during an interview or on the job. Also, offer to read written information such as menus, merchandise labels, etc. for customers. Also, when giving back change to customers, count it out to allow him or her to know which bills or change are which. Whether it be yourself or your employee serving food to a person who is blind, let him or her know where it is on the plate according to a clock orientation. So saying 12 o'clock is furthest from them and 6 o'clock is nearest. Also remove garnishes and anything that is not edible on the plate from the plate. Some customers may ask you to cut their food, and this may be done in the restaurant's kitchen before the meal is served. Also, before leaving, individuals who are blind or visually impaired, inform him or her that you're leaving and ask if he or she needs anything. Now, the next two slides consist of interacting or etiquette tips for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. Be aware that individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing communicate in various ways. Pay attention to cues as to whether the person uses sign language, is reading lips, writing, or gesturing. American Sign Language, or ASL, is an entirely different language from English with grammar of its own. Lip reading is difficult for people who are deaf, especially if their first language is ASL, because the majority of sounds in English are formed inside the mouth, and it's hard to speech read a second language. People who have a hearing loss, however, communicate in English. They use some hearing, but may rely on amplification and or seeing the speaker's lips to communicate effectively. There is a range of communication preferences and styles among people with hearing loss that cannot be explained within today's presentation. It is also helpful to note that the majority of people who have incurred a hearing loss as adults do not communicate with sign language and do use English in which they may be candidates for writing and or assistive listening devices to help improve communication. So for example, hearing aids. Before speaking to a person who is deaf or has a hearing loss and you're trying to capture or gain their attention, you can either extend your arm, wave your hand, tap him or her on the shoulder, or flicker the light, depending on the circumstances. Don't cover your mouth and avoid chewing gum or food when speaking. When talking, face the person, Also, a quiet, well-lit room is the most favorable setting of providing effective communication for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. The bottom line here is to remember to speak as you normally do and be clear. Most people who have a hearing loss rely on reading people's lips as they are speaking to understand what is being said. Also, be prepared to repeat what you said if he or she does not understand you. Also, maintain eye contact and speak directly to the person who is deaf versus his or her sign language interpreter, as I had mentioned throughout the presentation. You can also consider when exchanging information that is complex, for example, job interviews, work-related training, doctor's offices, etc. The most effective way to communicate with someone who is deaf is through a sign language interpreter. Now, for simple interactions with someone who is deaf, communicating with them may consist of writing back and forth. However, pay attention to his or her preferred communication style or ask him or her for their permission. Include employees in casual conversations or company events. If necessary, provide a sign language interpreter. Individuals who are deaf and some who have a hearing loss may make and receive telephone calls with the assistance of various technologies, including a TTY, which is short for teletypewriter, or a video relay service, or BRS. BRS enables a person who is deaf or has a hearing loss to make and receive telephone calls through a communications assistant who is a qualified American Sign Language interpreter. For many people who are deaf or have a hearing loss, BRS is closer to functionally equivalent telephone services than any other form of relay service. For American Sign Language users, BRS conversations flow more smoothly, naturally, and faster than communicating by typing. When someone who uses TTY or BRS calls a business that does not have a TTY, the call is placed through the state's relay service. Therefore, a business that does not have a TTY can reach a customer who is a TTY user through the relay service. Now, if you receive a relay call, the operator will identify it as such. Please do not hang up. This is the way that people who are deaf are able to conduct business with you. Now, moving on to interacting or etiquette tips for individuals with speech disabilities. People who have had a stroke, are deaf, uses a voice prosthesis, or who may stammer or stutter may be difficult to understand. It's important to give your full attention to him or her and essentially be patient and listen. Also, don't interrupt or complete his or her sentences. If you do not understand what is being said to you, ask him or her to repeat it. You can also repeat back what he or she said to ensure you're correctly heard and to ensure you correctly heard what was being said to you. If you're still not able to understand what was said, you can ask him or her to write it down. Relax and communicate as you normally do. Consider offering a personal interview as an alternative option versus a phone interview to a person who stammers or stutters. Consider providing interview questions in advance or ahead of time to allow time for him or her to prepare for and deliver responses effectively. And if he or she is using an augmentative speech device, the same rules as above still apply. Allow him or her the time it takes for them to speak in their own way, even when it's through a machine. It might be an electronic voice, but it's their heart and mind that is coming through it. The following are interactions or etiquette tips for individuals with respiratory disabilities or chemical sensitivity. Nevertheless, not all disabilities are apparent and can be hidden. A person may make a request or act in a way that seems strange to you. That request or behavior may be disability related. For example, you may give seemingly simple verbal directions to someone, but the person asks you to write the information down. He or she may have a learning disability that makes written communication easier for him or her. Or a person may ask to sit rather than stand in line. He or she may be fatigued from a condition such as cancer or may be feeling the effects of medication. Now moving on to providing those etiquette tips for individuals with respiratory disabilities or chemical sensitivity. Be aware that products such as stale air, cleaners, perfume, cologne, air fresheners, etc., that are commonly used in workplaces or businesses may trigger a reaction for individuals with respiratory or chemical sensitivity limitations. When interviewing people, consider not wearing fragrances or cologne. Consider maintaining good ventilation or air quality control, which will benefit all employees. So for example, individual employees or customers that may smoke, maybe consider having a separate designated area for them to go to. If possible, try to avoid spray cleaning tables, windows, or other surfaces when people are within your business. If you or others must use the spray product, spray or pour it closely into the cloth and not within the air, or use less toxic spray products. Now, individuals with mental health disabilities may at times have difficulty coping with the tasks and interactions in daily life. His or her diagnosis may interfere with his or her ability to feel, think, or relate to others. Most individuals with mental health diagnoses are not violent. Avoid using stereotypes or making assumptions about him or her and how he or she interacts with others. Because it is a hidden disability, chances are you will not even realize that person has a mental health condition. Individuals with mental health diagnoses have varying personalities and different methods of coping with their disability. Some may have trouble picking up on social cues, while others may be super sensitive. One person may have very high energy, while someone else may appear to be sluggish. During a crisis, provide assistance and support in a calm manner, just as you would with anyone else. Ask how you can help and inquire if there is a support person who can be requested to help. Stress can negatively affect his or her ability to function. Therefore, if possible, try to keep the stressful situation to a minimum. Again, that is if it's possible. Generally speaking, individuals with developmental disabilities typically learn at a slower pace. He or she may also have a tough time using what he or she has learned and applying it among multiple settings. It's important to speak to him or her in clear sentences using simple and concrete concepts versus abstract ones. If necessary, help him or her understand a complex idea by breaking it into simpler, smaller parts. Individuals with developmental disabilities may be anxious to please others. So, for example, during an interview, he or she may tell you what he or she thinks you want to hear. The questions you ask should be rephrased in a neutral way to elicit accurate information. You can do this by verifying responses by repeating each question in a different way. Individuals with developmental disabilities oftentimes rely on routine. Therefore, be aware that if there is a change in the workplace or other environments, it may require some attention and time to get adjusted to it. Now, service animals. This seems to be a very hot topic now for businesses and employers. So therefore, I wanted to provide some information on service animals during today's presentation. Service animals are defined as dogs that are individually trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. Examples of such work or tasks include guiding people who are blind, alerting people who are deaf, pulling a wheelchair, alerting and protecting a person who is having a seizure, reminding a person with a mental health diagnosis to take prescribed medications, calming a person with post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD during an anxiety attack, or performing other duties. Service animals are working animals, not pets. The work or task a dog has been trained to provide must be directly related to the person's disability. Dogs whose sole function is to provide comfort or emotional support do not qualify as service animals under the ADA. Now, under the ADA, state and local governments, businesses, and nonprofit organizations that serve the public generally must allow service animals to accompany people with disabilities in all areas of the facility where the public is normally allowed to go. Under the ADA, service animals must be harnessed, leashed, or secured unless these devices interfere with the service animal's work or the individual's disability prevents using these devices. In that case, the individual must maintain control of the animal through voice, signal, or other effective control. When it's not obvious what service animals provide, only limited inquiries are allowed. There are simply two questions that can be asked. Is the service dog, or is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And the second question that can be asked is, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? Now, a person with a disability can't be asked to remove his or her service animal from the premises unless the dog is out of control and the handler does not take effective action to control it, or the dog is not housebroken. When there is a legitimate reason to ask that a service animal be removed, staff must offer the person with the disability the opportunity to obtain the goods or services without the animal's presence. Establishments that sell or prepare food must allow service animals in public areas, even if state or local health codes prohibit animals on the premises. Now that wraps up my presentation. However, I would like to turn it over to questions now. And also on this last slide has my contact information for those that are interested in reaching out to me, whether it be questions or so forth.
All right, thank you, Kim. As you said, we'll now open it up for questions. If you want to ask a question, go to the panel on the side of your screen, and then you may need to click that orange arrow if you can't see the panel so you can maximize that panel. If you type in your questions in the chat box, then you can click send and we will receive them. So I've gotten a couple questions here. Kim, the first question was, my staff always wonders how much assistance that they should offer to a customer who uses a wheelchair or to a person who has an obvious visual impairment. Should the clerk ask if the customer wants assistance getting items from a shelf, let's say, or ask them if they need help opening doors, or should the employee just wait until the customer asks for that assistance?
Well, you know, and again, it kind of depends on the availability of staff, but it's important to consider what is that reasonable modification that can be made, you know, for staff that they see an individual with a physical disability they're struggling, they can offer their help, or maybe just make it a general practice within your business to all customers that come in and just say, can I be of assistance or offer any assistance, or just simply say, please let me know if you need any assistance. Or sometimes on the flip side, individuals or customers may come in and say, can I have the assistance of you or another staff?
Okay. The next question that came in, a customer came in who had a speech impediment, and it was difficult to understand what they were asking. So, what is appropriate here? Is it appropriate to let them know that we are having a problem understanding and ask them to write it down, or what would you suggest?
Good question. As I mentioned in that slide, if don't be afraid to say if you're not able to understand him or her, just simply say just not able to understand them. And you can offer or have them repeat back to you verbally what he or she has said and see if you can understand that a second time. However, simply after that second time, if you're still not able to understand, just indicates that you're simply not able to understand, and maybe just offer what can be done. Maybe just offer, simply say, can I write down on a piece of paper of some solutions to how I can provide support, or even offer a piece of paper to the individual and just ask them if you can offer that piece of paper and as to how you can better understand him or her. And if that person, simply by offering that yes or no, simply just hopefully they'll answer in that yes or no. However, if you're interested in reaching out to me more to kind of work through some of those solutions, I encourage you to do so. I'm here to provide support to any businesses or so forth.
Okay, yeah, perfect. The next two questions that I have to do with the service animals. The first one is, if a customer comes in to a restaurant with the service dog, should I or am I responsible for providing food and or water for that service dog?
That is a good question, and that is something I don't have the direct answer to. However, I will look up that answer following the conclusion of the webinar and email that to Donna or Katie at the South Dakota Retailer Association to simply email that.
Okay, perfect. And then the second one, again, dealing with the service animals, this question says, I've had people come in to my business with various types of animals and say that they are service animals, including cats and birds. As I understand what you said, is it only dogs that are considered service animals, or are there other types of service animals?
There's a difference between service animals. There's kind of the service animals, and then there's also the companion for the individuals that may require that emotional support, especially for individuals with mental health diagnoses, and that is information I can provide kind of that clarification between the two. But from my understanding, under the ADA, the service animals are dogs or even miniature horses. But
okay.
what I will do though is to provide that full in-depth information. Is I'll explain the difference. I'll email again Donna and Katie with that information, explain the differences between the service and emotional support animals, and then kind of that distinction.
Yeah, that would be great. And if there's a difference in what has to be done as far as the food or water or letting them into a place of business, that would be great to know too, since there are kind of two different categories of these animals.
Yep, I sure will.
Perfect. Thank you. So I think that's all the questions that we've had sent in right now. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add from these questions or anything in general you want to add.
Not that I can think of. Again, just for those that are on today's webinar, don't hesitate to reach out to me or even email Donna or Katie at South Dakota Retailer Association. If you have a question or need assistance with something, just simply here to be of support.
All right. That's perfect. And again, I think the contact information is still up for people to see and jot down the phone number and your email address. So that concludes our presentation today. I'd like to thank Kim Hoberg for your time. This webinar was recorded, so a link to the recording will be emailed to all of you later today. And then one other thing before we conclude, I'd like to mention our next webinar. So on Thursday, November 16th, we'll present information on workers' comp basics. Representatives from Insurance Benefits Incorporated and the United Fire Group will explain basic steps to reduce your workers' comp costs, what to do if a worker is injured on the job, current workers' comp issues in South Dakota, and an update on our workers' comp and business insurance program. You can check our website at www.sdra.org for more details. Thank you to Kim, and thank you to everyone else for participating in today's program.